Well, hello everyone. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to my hotel room, because as it happens, I'm actually in a hotel room today and not in my room. I am traveling. I had explained that I think last weekend. Well, luckily enough, it turns out I have a bit of time to release a video for you, so this is what I will do, and I will come back to the question of Nietzsche today. So hopefully it will interest at least some of you, a topic that's not necessarily about INFJs or about MBTI. I don't have my books here with me, but keep in mind that at the links below you can check out my book on the INFJ, the Ecstatic Soul, and also my latest novel, The Infinite Castle. They're both available for less than $10. If you're interested in INFJ things or in fiction involving INFJs, you might be interested. Also, don't forget that you can support my Patreon page, which always helps massively, and thank you so much to my supporters, both old and recent. So I guess the reason why I wanted to discuss Nietzsche, there's a couple of reasons. Like the most straightforward reason is that it had been in my mind for a bit, because a friend of mine is seriously questioning whether Nietzsche is that good, and even went so far as to call him a mediocre philosopher, and it was a hot take, and it was kind of done in a kind of deliberate fashion. Another reason is that I've been thinking about this topic for a bit. It had been in my head, so it kind of formulated itself. So it sort of came to some semblance of articulation. Given that I don't actually have that much time. I still really wanted to release a video today. I thought, okay, that would be probably the best use of the little bit of free time I have, because that is kind of already in my head. I still plan to release a video tomorrow if I can. Again, I'm not promising it, but if I can, I certainly will. Okay. So Nietzsche, why is Nietzsche important after all? Well, first of all, it is correct, I think, to estimate that for a lot of people nowadays, maybe even more so like people online, a kind of disfigurement of Nietzsche is taking place, where people just assume or seem to think that Nietzsche's philosophy is about, it's essentially about displaying your pride shamelessly, thinking it's a good thing to display your pride, to not show empathy to others, and to promote an idea of superior human beings at the expense of inferior ones. And there are associations in the minds of some people between Nietzsche and Nazism, and certainly the philosophy of Nietzsche, via his sister in part, was I would argue that it was hijacked by some people in the Nazi party. But if you look closely at the philosophy of Nietzsche, it would be very difficult to reconcile it with the ideology of Nazism, because, well, actually there's a number of reasons, and those reasons hopefully will be obvious by the time that I've returned to some of the key aspects that make Nietzsche an actually important philosopher, one of the most important philosophers of the last 150 years or so in the West, perhaps the most influential. It's deserved, I think. There's a lot in Nietzsche that's particularly penetrating, particularly scathing, prophetic, and many other things besides. So I think the first thing that maybe will articulate the rest, will provide a kind of structure to the rest, is to start with the field of metaphysics in Nietzsche. Nietzsche came at a point where he said essentially that, in the words of Heidegger, Nietzsche ended metaphysics. It became really difficult and unusual to do metaphysics in philosophy after Nietzsche for about 100 years or so, until some of the more ambitious metaphysical works of Deleuze, who himself had written a book on Nietzsche, was an admirer of Nietzsche in many ways, but certainly wanted to take up the challenge and demonstrate that metaphysics is a possible field of investigation. Now, how is it that Nietzsche ended metaphysics in some sense? It's actually linked. People don't realize that Nietzsche is actually quite a systematic philosopher. Nietzsche's rejection of metaphysics is actually closely connected, to his rejection of the idea of absolute truth and to the idea of, perhaps the most well-known concept in Nietzsche, his rejection of the truth of religion and of morality, right? So in Nietzsche, you have a rejection of metaphysics. You have a rejection of the concept of absolute truth, something to do with epistemology. You have a rejection of religion, at least Western religions predicated on the idea of there being absolute truths as revealed by scripture. So maybe we could call them the Abrahamic religions. And finally, and last but not least, a rejection of the idea of morality. All this is deeply connected, because what do these four things have in common? Okay. Well, the thing that these four domains have in common is the concept of a hidden world. Okay? A hidden world is a world which is not here. It's not the world of flesh and blood. It's not the human world, the material world, the world of human relationships, this earth and the planets around it. It's a world beyond. We don't exactly know where. In other words, it's a transcendent world. Now, this is a world where the ultimate objects of metaphysics are supposed to be located. Metaphysics investigates what is the structure of this hidden world, this transcendent world. Absolute truth is, if we understand truth as correspondence to reality, which was the common understanding of truth at the time and still for many people today. Well, if certain truths are absolute, then they must correspond to absolute reality. And absolute reality is made up of these objects in the transcendent world. So there's a link between the metaphysics of the transcendent world and the epistemology of the transcendent world. If you say to say something that is necessarily true or absolutely true is to capture these objects. For some people nowadays, it might be the object of mathematics, for example, so it's such that if you say something that is true of those objects, that it is necessarily true. Okay, so if you imagine that applies to the entire, realm of anything that could be possibly true, we have the transcendent world and its necessary and absolute truths. Religion is linked because the Abrahamic religions propose that they have to have identified this transcendent world, okay, with this particular eternal object, the most important one, the most important being in that world being God, okay? So it's religions, Abrahamic religions are, if you like, they're a narrative providing a description of this transcendent world, as opposed to possible competing transcendent world. The world of the metaphysicians is not necessarily the same as the world of the religious people, but they have in common that it is transcendent and that they're competing worlds. And finally, last but not least, the world of morality, because morality is, if you like, there's something very important that Nietzsche does, and he's the first to do it. And if he's not the first, he's certainly the one to do it the most starkly and forcefully. And that is that he effects a very clear and marked distinction between morality and ethics. A lot of people nowadays, maybe a lot of people all the time, probably operate with a kind of blurred understanding of what distinguishes morality and ethics. For a lot of people, ethics, to be ethical and to be moral, is kind of the same thing. But there is a distinction, and Nietzsche proposes his own version of the distinction. One way that we could put it is that Nietzsche has no problem with ethics, in fact supports ethics, but heavily castigates, attacks and criticizes morality, and he does it devastatingly in many works, perhaps most famously Beyond Good and Evil and The Genealogy of Morality. I personally think, and I've read a lot of Nietzsche, that The Genealogy of Morality is his most important book, and the one that contains just page after page of mind-blowing insights and penetrating perspectives. But essentially, just to make this more concrete, we would have a distinction between what started out as ethics, which is predicated on how to live the good life, okay? Eudaimonia in Greek. One of the most famous works of ethics being the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle, which essentially is predicated on how it is possible and how best to live a good, flourishing life as a human being. Now, distinguish this, which has a very Greek tone to it, with morality, which Nietzsche would associate more with Kant and his various successors. The thing about Kant and the thing about morality understood in this sense is that it is not so much about human flourishing, but it's about more so obeying a law. It's about the risk of doing wrong rather than doing what's expected of you, which is the good. So the good is not so much here about flourishing and living a good life where you're joyful and happy and you're blooming, and in some sense you have this surplus of power from so much flourishing. And we get here a hint at the concept of power in Nietzsche, which is not about squashing other people. It's about flourishing in yourself, living the good life, ethics in its original Aristotelian sense, or we could say ancient Greek sense, because there's different approaches. Epicurus, of course, has his own approach. During the Renaissance, Montaigne, for example, Michel de Montaigne, if you're familiar with him, someone who had his own approach to ethics, and Nietzsche was really a fan of Montaigne in his own way. Morality is much more, thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do this. It's much more punitive. There's almost this notion implicit in morality that we have a tendency to want to do the bad rather than the good, and so we have to make an effort to do the good. Now, if we do the good, it's good. Good people. We can get some props for that, but it's minimal. Don't get too arrogant, because you might be doing bad tomorrow or in an hour. So there's something punitive, there's something austere, there's something external about morality. Morality is about obeying a law, which, in other words, is not something that you come up with yourself. There's much more place in ethics for how you approach things, how you imprint your own style of life onto the world and flourish in this way. Morality, that doesn't matter so much at all. It's really much more about how an externally given system of law ought to be obeyed. Now, that system can be coming in the form of natural law, It can come in the form of religious law, Christian morality, for instance, or Muslim morality, for instance. It's given by the Bible. It's, you obey the law because that's what is given in the scripture, and that's all. That's a very good example of morality. But it doesn't have to be that. It can be the rational moral law of Kant, something that is supposedly objectively given externally to you by the rule of reason. It can be something that we're much more familiar with nowadays, the whole plethora of human rights that are, devised in various legal theories and courts. It can be the kind of morality that is known nowadays as political correctness and wokeism. Wokeism nowadays is like the new Christian morality. Nietzsche would look at it this way. You shall do this, you shall not do that. You shall use this word, you shall not use this word. Otherwise you'll be punished. For example, cancelled. Or your life will be ruined, or so on and so forth. And you'll be kind of seen as a sinner, the modern conception of a sinner, someone who's a racist, someone who's a xenophobe or a transphobe or whatever it might be, or someone who is intolerant, and it becomes attached to their essence. So the woke morality has nothing to do with flourishing, and all to do with what Nietzsche understands by morals, punishment, castigation. So it's given externally, so it's not of this world. It has a transcendent validity to it, okay, morality. So I think that you can now see the connection between the rejection of those four domains in terms of how it's linked between the four of them. Morality given externally. It is the law of the transcendent world, which is what metaphysics studies. This transcendent domain or world has things that are true of it and therefore necessarily true. So absolute truth, epistemology. And finally, religions, particularly the Abrahamic religions, but not only, through their scriptures and revelation, offer a particular picture of what that world is. And no surprise that since the religions offer a particular picture of what that world is, they also offer, as a necessary follow-up from that, their own version of what absolute truth is and their own morality, religious morality. By showing this, we show that Nietzsche is very, very consistent and systematic in his rejection. And in the video tomorrow, I'll be looking a bit more closely at why he rejects them and what he proposes to replace them with. So it's going to be a lot of Nietzsche this weekend, I'm afraid. Hopefully you can still be edified a little bit, and your minds can be a little bit stimulated. Would love to hear any feedback so far. I wish you a beautiful day, and I will talk to you tomorrow, possibly from a different room, which will still not be my normal room. But anyway, look forward to seeing you then. See you guys. Bye-bye.